Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Bonjour, mes amis. My name is Yonah Diamond. I'm a senior legal counsel at the Canada-based Raoul Wallenberg Centre for Human Rights, led by the Honourable Irwin Cotler, who founded the All-Party Save Darfur Coalition in Parliament 20 years ago. And we are here today to present our findings from our international inquiry into atrocities in Darfur. I co-chaired our inquiry with my colleague Mutassim Ali from Darfur. We released the report a year into the conflict in Sudan, which was conducted with over 30 international jurists, scholars, founders of international criminal courts, presidents of Genocide Scholars Association, and we came to a few key conclusions, finding that the rapid support forces are responsible for committing genocide. These are the same forces that have succeeded to the Janjaweed militias of the early 2000s, who have killed hundreds of thousands in Darfur. And these are the same leaders who have never faced justice or accountability. And so the world is now watching another genocide unfold in Darfur on our watch. And we also found the key external outside actors that are fueling this conflict. In the 21st century, we now can track where arms come from and where the funding, where the political cover, where the diplomatic support comes from. And we cannot say we don't know what's happening in Darfur. We know that the RSF is committing genocide against particularly the Masalit, the Zagawa, and the Fur. They are now imposing a genocidal siege, blocking food, water, and essential aid, and destroying civilian infrastructure in North Darfur. And so we are here today to call on Canada to respond and fulfill its obligations to prevent and halt and stop genocide and intervene in the world's biggest humanitarian crisis. We're talking about 25 million people, half the country in need of humanitarian aid. The projections for the largest famine in decades is unfolding. We're threatening to kill 2.5 million, 5% of the country in the coming months, including nearly 4 million children already acutely malnourished. And the numbers go on. It's the largest humanitarian crisis in terms of sheer numbers. And the response by Canada is simply insufficient so far. And that's why we are calling on Canada today to impose the same targeted sanctions against the perpetrators and enablers that other countries already have. Canada has only sanctioned 6 individuals and entities. It has yet to sanction some of the senior leaders of the RSF, including Hemeti, the commander, and their entities that are based in the United Arab Emirates. So we're calling on Canada to explicitly call out the funders and the fuelers of the genocide in Darfur in the UAE. And we are calling to fill that gap in terms of sanctioning those responsible and to support all accountability mechanisms at the international level, including the investigations at the ICC and the International Court of Justice eventually. We are also calling on Canada to open up its doors, because the same program that was implemented for Ukraine, we know we have the tools to open doors to Sudanese fleeing the conflict, yet we have a cap on the pathway to get here, which is already closed at 3,250, whereas nearly 1 million Ukrainians have been granted temporary emergency visas in Canada. We know that this is just blatant discrimination and that Canada needs to respond to the scale and gravity of the atrocities on the ground. I will now like to introduce members of Parliament, first starting with the Liberals, Ali Ehsassi, to make some remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Yonah. I should also say we're very, very grateful to the Raoul Wallenberg Centre for having released a truly impressive report last month on April 15th. We're here because quite clearly we are talking about what can only be described as a forgotten war. This is a war that has already displaced 10 million people. It's also a war that is on the precipice of becoming the largest famine we have seen in 40 years. For that reason, the Security Council passed a resolution last week. The critical parts of that resolution are that, first of all of the warring factions in Sudan need to de-escalate. They have to make sure that the siege that is currently going on in El Fasher comes to an end, that they do enter into negotiations. Another significant aspect of the resolution last week at the United Nations was that everyone should be respecting the arms embargo. What Sudan needs is not arms, but food. And I certainly hope that all of the activity that we saw last week will ensure that there will be sustained focus on Sudan and that all the members of the international community recognize full well what it is that they need to do to avert the worst famine in 40 years. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Heather McPherson. I am the NDP Foreign Affairs critic, and I am happy to be joining my colleagues and representatives from the Raoul Wallenberg Centre today to talk about what is a very serious crisis. The humanitarian crisis in Sudan is catastrophic. To give you an example, last week, MSF and the Ministry of Health were forced to suspend all activities in one hospital in El Fasher after RSF soldiers stormed the facility, opened fire, and looted it. Only one hospital in El Fasher is still operating, and the needs are enormous. Warring parties are not respecting medical facilities, which are protected under international law. Over 8 million people have been displaced. There are major barriers to humanitarian access across Sudan, and reports of serious atrocities, including sexual violence and brutal murders of children. On May 21st, 2024, the UN Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide affirmed that the risk of genocide is growing every single day. On June 13, 2024, the UN Secretary Council unanimously adopted an urgent resolution demanding the Rapid Support Forces, or the RSF, halt its devastating siege on El Fasher, North Darfur, underscoring the need for civilian protection. We have known for over a year that this situation is deteriorating, and Canada has not responded appropriately. In March, New Democrats wrote to Minister Joly, to Minister Miller, and Minister Hussein with several asks of the Canadian government. These include increased humanitarian funding, new sanctions on those responsible for violations of international law and human rights, holding perpetrators to account, including support for the International Criminal Court in its investigations, lead a diplomatic push for negotiations, as there are no meaningful negotiations currently underway, name and shame states that are arming the Sudanese government and paramilitary forces, including Russia and China, and immediately accelerate the process of applications for dependent family members of Sudanese Canadians. The government must ensure that all dependent family members receive priority processing of permanent resident applications from Sudan. These people should be Canada's priority, especially in instances where there are minor children that have been separated from their family. Today, the call from the Raoul Wallenberg Centre reiterates a number of these asks of the Canadian government. I'm proud to stand here with them on behalf of the NDP to demand better from the Canadian government for the people of Sudan. The people of Sudan do not have time. The time right now is for action. Thank you. Mr. Green.
Thank you, MP McPherson. Mike Morrice, MP for Kitchener Centre and a member of the Green Caucus. It's an honour this morning to stand alongside colleagues MP Ehsassi and MP McPherson, representing three parties in our House of Commons as we call together for the world to not look away. And my deep thanks to the Raoul Wallenberg Centre for their incredible work and their tireless advocacy. Strongly support and agree with the calls you've heard already from my two colleagues. Just to add, in particular, when speaking with Sudanese Canadians in my community, the disappointment in not seeing more quick action when it comes to reuniting families. We continue to be told that nothing can be done until fall of this year at earliest. It's entirely unacceptable. We need to see this government respond with the urgency that the crisis in Sudan demands. That includes the sanctions you've heard about already. It includes advocating for the ICC to be respected, but it also includes calling for this government to move quicker. We've seen other countries having had processing move much more quickly. And instead, when it comes to Sudanese Canadians looking to reunite with family members of theirs, it seems to be that they continue to be told to wait. And so we will continue to amplify those calls alongside others, again, for this government to respond with the urgency that the crisis in Sudan demands. I'll pass it back to Yonah, and happy to take questions from media as there are any. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. I just want to add a couple of action items for Canada to call explicitly for civilian protection mission in Sudan. We can lead on this. As a Canadian, I've been very proud that Canada has a history of leading the responsibility to protect doctrine at the UN and a history of civilian protection missions. And we can lead now too. These communities have nowhere to go in North Darfur. They are not near Chad. They are not near any of the borders. And they are surrounded and face imminent atrocities. And we know how the RSF commits these atrocities throughout Darfur. Mass killings, massacres against men and boys, mass sexual violence against women and girls, particularly based on their identity from these indigenous African tribes, non-Arab tribes. So we're calling on Canada to take the leadership because other countries are looking to Canada to lead on this civilian protection mission. And we are also calling on Canada to end all military relationship with the UAE. The UAE is still Canada's in the top 20 countries receiving military exports in goods and tech from Canada. Top 20 countries. This implies that Canada is also implicated in supporting the financier-in-chief and the arms supplier of the genocidaires. This is something that needs to happen today. Thank you very much.
We will start with questions in the room if we have any. Any questions in the room? No? And we'll start with then questions online. Please raise your hand if you have a question online. First question online is from Christian Smith. Please go ahead.
Hello, thank you very much for your presentation today. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, we can.
Okay. My interest is on the legal aspect of this. Can you sum up what can be done legally to address what is happening, and what impact could it have? What practical impact could it have?
Yonah?
Yeah, so I briefly mentioned the targeted sanctions program that Canada can implement. These are available in the foreign policy toolkit, and based on our legal submission, actually, that I'm happy to provide from last year, we've identified perpetrators and enablers, a list for Canada to follow suit with our allies. We are also planning on bringing a case to the International Court of Justice, and Canada can lead on this as well by either taking the case itself or finding an ally to take the lead against the United Arab Emirates for complicity in genocide. Breaches of the Genocide Convention offend humanity and are an assault on everyone's values. And so the range of regional and international mechanisms must be engaged, and Canada can lead on this with its allies, particularly also with the African Union, in order to explore all the ways to hold the perpetrators immediately accountable to halt the atrocities.
Thank you.
Do you have a follow-up?
Well, I guess uh, this has been going on for 2 decades, to a greater or lesser extent. What will it take in a nutshell to stop this and get on a better path?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question, and we know that the failure to actually have any form of transitional justice and accountability, al-Bashir has never actually been held in a court of law, despite the arrest warrants, but we need further investigation and arrest warrants. We know that putting the perpetrators on notice, they care about their reputation, and the ICC just announced recently that it is continuing its investigation into these patterns in Darfur specifically, and all countries have a responsibility to join in providing all the funding necessary to complete these investigations, and also to fill in the gaps in humanitarian immediate, because we fear that this is the time to act, as Heather McPherson mentioned, basically already has passed. Famine has set in, genocide is underway, and now we're at a desperate moment where we need to have immediate measures and immediate costs so that we can enforce the arms embargo, as member Ali Ehsassi mentioned. There is already an international legal basis for blocking arms, and yet we see countries in the region openly violating this UN arms embargo. So we have the legal grounds, we have the genocide warrants. It's a repeat, and it's perhaps the most blatant and egregious example in the world where there is a lack of follow-up on accountability, and countries continue to defer to what is clearly a sham and failed peace process instead of actually doing something.
You consider to be the specific immigration measures you'd like to see Canada put in place, including, how many people should we be welcoming here, and any other measures that you think would be helpful?
I'll let maybe Mike or
Sure. Oh, thank you for that question. I mean, realistically, what we've seen recently is the government putting almost a price tag on different people. The fact that we had 40,000 from Afghanistan, unlimited from Ukraine, 1,000 from Gaza, from Palestine, and when those numbers are in place, that's inappropriate. Every single situation should be treated equally, and I'm of the firm belief that we need to be putting a priority on making sure that people from Sudan can flee the violence. The other situation that we have is that it is my understanding that even with the plan in place to bring 350 Sudanese from Sudan to Canada, that in fact through that scheme, none have arrived in Canada to date. The processes have been too slow. They've been limited. The numbers should never be limited based on country. Canada should be opening its doors to be helping people right now, and that's not the case.
Just to add to that, on the timeliness, I've had the chance to ask officials about why the process has been going so slowly. In my case, in Waterloo Region, for example, the president of the Sudanese Canadian Association of Waterloo Wellington himself has a brother and mother in Sudan right now. Those applications went in early March, I believe March 2nd and 4th, with no response yet. Officials replied that that's because the immigration pathway that's been proposed is a permanent pathway as opposed to a temporary one, and they claim that permanent pathway takes more time to put in place. What many of us have been calling for is to then also provide a temporary pathway so that folks can come to Canada more safely and more quickly. That we shouldn't be seeing months and months in the midst of famine and a crisis to have Sudanese Canadians waiting for their family members to see if they might come to safety. A temporary immigration pathway would be a much quicker means of making sure folks get to safety, in addition to looking at the numbers to ensure that we don't see differential treatment based on what country someone might be coming from.
How many should we be welcoming here?
Yonah, did you?
many as we can.
There is this program for Ukraine emergency travel visas where all the operational obstacles for integrating extended visas were lifted and waived, and the same can be done for Sudan. We know that there's a route, and the tools are there when conflicts of this scale erupt, available to all nationals from Sudan. But just to give one example of a Canadian family affected, some of you might have heard of Khulud Abakar, just one small, tiny fraction of the families that have been affected, relocated 5 times in Sudan. Family, spent money, resources, and time only to be told that the cap has been reached at 3,250 for this pathway. So the pathway's closed after all this effort. It's just simply disgraceful and needs to change.
I could just add a word.
Zero.
I just wanted for all of us to be mindful of the logistical challenges that exist in Sudan as well. I, for one, would be very much in favor of seeing more Sudanese come here. But the reality on the ground is that 50% of people are food insecure. But even of those individuals, 90% of those individuals, there is no access for food to go in. We also heard about the fact that Médecins Sans Frontières actually withdrew from Sudan. So the reality is it's very, very perilous in Sudan. That shouldn't stop us from looking for solutions, looking to welcome more Sudanese, but those are the realities that we have to contend with as well. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.